Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Well, welcome back and welcome to people who may be joining us online to day 7 of the planning inquiry. The plan today is to start with discussions on sewage matters to inform the conditions and then discuss in more detail the conditions that are agreed. Where had I got to? I'd asked whether anything had raised its head over the period that we were away, and the answer was no. Okay. I received it is listed as a proof of evidence, but we haven't cross-examined on it. But the statement from Mr. Brackley, who's here, which obviously outlined concerns with the pumping station, acknowledges that there's been problems, particularly associated with Century Fields. And that largely aligns with the parish council concerns that I heard on day 1 and that I've had in document 9, which was the Bramley sewage issues. And I had a more recent document that gave us some photographs from events that have happened literally in the last week, courtesy of, I would imagine, the rainfall that led up to this cold spell that's just arrived. The report triggered a couple of questions for me, and I'd just like to put those perhaps to Mr. Brackley, but I wonder if it's worth just, Mr. Banner, whether we can have a sort of 1-minute summary of the position of the appellants before I open up my questions or others, just to sort of set the scene, if that makes sense.
Certainly. Shall I first of all perhaps introduce Mr. Brackley for those who aren't aware who he is?
Yes,
and he tells us who he is on page 1 of his proof of evidence, where you tell us you're Alan Brackley, the founder of JNP Group Consulting Engineers. You're based in Chesham. You're a chartered engineer and a fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers, as well as the Institution of Structural Engineers. You've been practicing as a chartered engineer in private practice for 43 years. And prior to that, you were employed by Buckinghamshire County Council and for the Department of Transport. And you advise on civil and structural engineering aspects of development, including in relation to flood risk and drainage. And then you set out on that page the various flood risk assessments the JNP Group have done. And is all of that information correct? Exactly. So perhaps over to you, if you can explain to us in a few short words, very sort of high level abstraction, why your judgment is that there's no basis for withholding planning permission on flood risk grounds, and perhaps the associated issue, flood risk, foul water drainage grounds, and the associated issue of why, in your judgment, in the event that there were a delay in Thames Water providing the necessary infrastructure, the first element of the development could commence with the foul drainage being tankered off to an alternative location. So just in a few short words, the summary of your analysis in relation to those issues.
Right, well, it's not in dispute that there are problems with the foul sewers in the village, leading to flooding at Centenary Fields, primarily due to surface water infiltration from one source to another into the foul sewer. It's not a combined sewer, it's supposed to be foul only. This basically overwhelms the pumping station. Pumping station can't cope with the flows, and it then backs up and appears out of the lowest available orifice through the ground, resulting in the flooding. Thames Water are well aware of the issue and have a statutory duty to tackle it. So far, they haven't tackled it. They are looking into it. They've also said to us that they're not going to look into it in any more detail until they know the outcome of the proceedings that we're all part of, which I found a bit strange because it's a problem that needs curing. There are two ways they could cure it, either by stopping all the infiltration, which is probably numerous illegal connections of downpipes, God knows what, into the sewer. The simplest thing is to accept there's the volume and increase the capacity of the network. And that's primarily by increasing the capacity of the Bramley pumping station. If they don't manage to carry that out in a timely fashion before development commences, then the option to allow development to proceed in the interim is to make use of the storage provided by the Fowl pumping station, which will be provided on site. This gives us enough storage for up to 50 properties to require a tanker to empty the storage in the Fowl pumping station on our site once a day with one tanker visit. So we're proposing that up to 50 dwellings could be properly constructed and built and occupied with one tanker visit per day. That, I understand, would probably need to go to the Chinham sewage works, because Thames Water inform us that the nearest sewage works at Sherfield on Loddon does not accept waste from tankers. We haven't verified that. We've taken Thames Water's word for it. So that's the summary of the situation.
Thank you. And then there's a statement of common ground, which is signed by you, Miss Lisa Suden on behalf of the council, and by Mr. James Hearn on behalf of Thames Water. That, I think, is in the core documents as CD 6.5. And amongst other things, obviously it should be read as a whole, but at section 2, Thames Water acknowledge that they have legal duties under the Water Industry Act 1991 to ensure new developments can be accommodated into the existing wastewater network. And it's also agreed by everybody that the National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 188, requires the inspector to assume that the duties under the Water Industry Act will be effectively discharged. There's then also referenced section 6 to the upgrades you've referred to. And it's agreed by those who've signed the Statement of Common Ground, including Thames Water and the Council and you, that the solution would be within Thames Water's standard timescale of 18 to 20 months. And Thames Water reaffirmed their intention to comply with their legal duties under the Water Industry Act, which include to ensure that the development in the area is effectually drained. Pausing there, to the best of your knowledge, is all that agreement still applicable and up to date?
Yes.
And then there's a list of 3 potential planning conditions. There's one condition in a form of words that Thames Water have suggested. And then there are 2 alternative conditions, B and C. And B is the form of words the appellant prefers, and C is the form of words the council prefers. Again, does that, to the best of your knowledge, remain the menu of suggested options by those who've signed the Statement of Common Ground?
It is.
Thank you. So does that suffice in terms of
It does. Thank you very much. Couple of questions from me, Mr. Brackley. I'll see if there's any questions from interested parties here. Focus is on number 1 pumping station, but from what I've read, the parish also have concerns about treatment works themselves at Sherfield and its ability to accept the flows. It isn't something I picked up in your proofs. Is that something you're conscious of? Is that something you've looked into?
It's not been raised by Thames Water as an issue.
Okay. Just on the Statement of Common Ground, it is a Statement of Common Ground other than 2 areas of disagreement, 7.3 and 7.5. I just wanted to check what are the areas of disagreement, because it says the unlikely scenario could involve renegotiating the infrastructure phasing of tankering foul flows as or may involve inhibiting flows to the new pumping station. Which of the 3, or is it all 3, disagree between the parties? I imagine the infrastructure phasing probably isn't a contentious issue, but is it the tankering or the inhibiting of flows?
It's just the tankering.
So it's just, okay.
think so. It may be important as well to appreciate what the conditions do and don't do. So the condition we seek doesn't actually rule in tankering, but it doesn't rule it out. It requires details of any solutions to be submitted and approved. What you're being asked to do by the council is, as I understand it, is to rule it out. And what we say that the appropriate ultimate determining question for you is, has the council shown it's necessary to make the development acceptable? Bear in mind that's the test for a condition. To rule it out at this stage, we don't say it should be ruled in at this stage because we hope, based on what Thames Water said, it shouldn't be needed. But we don't see that there's any evidential basis to justify the conclusion that it's necessary to make the development acceptable to rule it out. Bearing in mind that Mr. Brackley has evidence that it's technically possible, and Mr. Bevis has evidence that it can be dealt with in terms of transportation capacity and safety. So that's kind of where we say the lie of the land is, for want of a better term, on that issue.
Can I respond on that, please?
You can.
In our view, that's the wrong way round, and it's for the appellant to satisfy you that it's necessary that provision be made in relation to temporary arrangements to render the development suitable, applying the tests in respect of planning conditions.
That sounds like something we have to make submission on in due course.
Let's unpack the condition in a little bit more detail when I make sure that I've completed just on understanding the position, if you like. The storage associated with the pumping station on site that's being used as, promoted as a potential temporary solution to allow for that tankering. That pumping station is required in any case for this.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
It was my assumption that invert levels, looking at the site and having driven around it, were going to be quite tricky. Otherwise, okay. The PPG, which I know still hadn't been updated for the new framework, but there we go. The PPG has taken what was an old friend of mine, Circular 399, many, many years ago, condensed it down into one paragraph, as it's done with many, 34020, but still has this hierarchy of delivery of foul drainage with direct connection to mains at the top and only cascading down to other alternatives. I guess if I was being devil's advocate in this case, I'd say that what you're proposing in terms of tankering is a kind of cesspit arrangement, something that now doesn't even feature on that hierarchy. Now, it is temporary.
Exactly.
Yeah. It is temporary, but the question I guess I have is it temporary for how long? And the difficulty is I don't have anything, apart from the implication that it could be 18 to 24 months, to assist me with how long that might be.
Can I answer that? The ultimate answer to that question is it will depend upon the scheme to be submitted and agreed. So in our proposed condition, we would have to, this may be relevant to the potential disputing submissions as to where the onus lies, is, as I say, we are not ruling it in our condition. The condition would allow us to make the case for a temporary arrangement, should that be necessary, to explain what the temporary arrangement would be, to justify it. The council would then review what's proposed and the justification put forward and reach a decision. Obviously, if we didn't like it, we would have an opportunity to appeal under Section 78. So there's a process allowed which would allow a finer grained consideration of these. I think your 18 to 20 month figure is probably the best we can go on for now. It may not be that. It may be shorter. It could theoretically be. We don't think it's necessary because, I say, all it's likely to be necessary because of the duties on Thames Water and their intention to comply with them. But that's how we say the process. It would be for us to make the case, explain, come up with the details, and the council to scrutinise those details and reach a decision. Which is why I will be saying in closing, Ms. Sargent has wrongly defined it, because the making of the case and the justifying it by us will follow under that condition. What the condition does is allow us to make the case. What the council seek is to preclude us from having any opportunity to make the case, to rule it out. We neither rule it in nor rule it out. That's the dividing line between you, it seems to me.
Okay. Mr. Brackley, have you got examples of tankering being adopted in similar circumstances elsewhere?
Yes, my personal knowledge is one we did with Southern Water about 3 or 4 years ago, where they were slow in upgrading the system to undertake a new development by Crowdace, and the local authority readily agreed to a temporary tanking situation until upgrades had taken place.
Okay, I mean, I don't know the full circumstances, but it may be that the upgrades weren't stuck in the internal governance process of Southern Water at the time. But that was on a similar scale, a tanker a day?
Yep. Yeah. The limiting thing was stopping it going septic because it's not happening. So even if you got 10 houses connected, you'd still be tankering daily.
Okay, a quick summary, and I'll see if the councillors want to ask any questions, and I'll then give the council a chance to come back in too, and then we'll perhaps unpack those conditions in a bit more detail. I mean, it's clear to me that the appellants aren't denying that there's a problem in Bramley. It's a problem that your photographs and commentary outline very clearly. However, it's an existing problem. I'm somewhat surprised to hear that Thames Water are waiting on the outcome of this inquiry, because I would have thought it's the recent developments that have triggered the concerns that have. And I'll have to be careful there. There may have been problems before, but the recent developments can only have exacerbated that problem and increased the statutory requirement on Thames Water to deliver the improvements. And I'm not sure whether this scheme was going ahead or not should really have affected that. But I don't have Thames Water here to explain the position. So an acceptance that there is a problem, a solution to the problem being Thames Water upgrading of the number 1 pumping station. And if that is not forthcoming in a period of, it's probably 2 years when you'd have to trigger, minimum 2 years, in order to bring in the 50 houses. That's allowing for this period reserve matters applications when we're at.
Yes, the discussions. I mean, the discussions with Thames Water, and your position is correct, and the discussions that we had with Thames Water, we were as surprised as you are. But I think the issue is that clearly, if the works that may be required may be slightly different, if this is consented, and then if it is not, and clearly the discussion with
scale,
in terms of scale. So clearly, Thames Water have been having those discussions, and clearly there's been communication with the parish ongoing for some time in terms of coming up with a solution. But I think their position was, we want to know what the outcome of this commission is, because there might be a slight difference in terms of the works that are required. But as you saw, and we had a discussion yesterday about delivery of this site. Clearly, if consent is granted by you, let's say in a few months, there is a period in which reserve matters are developed, discharge of pre-commencement conditions, site set up. The period set out by Thames Water is from the grant of the outline consent, that's 18 to 20 months. So it isn't 18 and 20 months once we kind of get on site and delivering. Hopefully, or that period should be the first 12 months of the 18 to 20 months, we are still dealing with discharge of conditions and reserve matters, etc. So it's not the position isn't that from the construction or commencement or delivery of the first house, it's 18 to 20. The ideal solution, if Thames Water meet their 18 to 20 months, that's when we'll start delivering the first houses in the programme that we discussed yesterday and set out in my evidence. There wouldn't be need for anything if Thames Water do fulfil, because that would exactly meet our target for delivery of new houses.
Thank you.
So that is the position. And then, as Mr. Banner and Mr. Brackley have set out, if that it doesn't happen and we are in position to deliver the houses, then there is a discussion with the local authority as to what measures may be acceptable at that time. And as part of the programme, it will be time limited. I assume that Thames Water, clearly, the council and ourselves will be liaising, and the parish liaising with the statutory undertaker to see what their programme is. It may be 6 months, it may be a year. We obviously at this stage, so we just don't know. But if Thames Water do meet their standard targets, and as set out in the statement of common ground, they've acknowledged the problem. They know it's a problem. They know, as you said, it's an existing problem. They know it's a high priority. You would hope that if they meet those targets, there wouldn't be any issue, because that's exactly when we are looking to start delivering the houses.
Okay, thank you.
Would it be helpful to put the council sort of?
I was definitely going to come to the council. I was just going to give the parish a chance to see if they, parish and district council, to see if they got questions, because obviously I've got a lot of documentation from them. But yes, no, rest assured, we're not going to move on until I've heard from the council as well. Is there anything you wanted to ask? We've got the appellants here. We've got their proposals up.
I presume you've read the document about Bramley sewage issues, presenting evidence on day one.
Document 9, it was the series of
Lots of examples in there. Conditions being set on developers when various phases of development supposedly overcome our problems. None of them really work or forthcoming. I'm afraid I have no confidence. Anything you write here will have any effect on what happens in Bramley. Thames Water tell us they're designing a system to try and cope with what we have at the moment. They're not designing a system to cope with an extra 140 houses. It's the idea of tankers in the 21st century, which will have to go across the railway crossing, sit there for half an hour or so. Because they can't dump it into the works at Sherford or Nodden, because that's yet another choke point in the system. That regularly overflows. So we'll have to go down the A33 to Chinham. The A33 every day this week has been absolutely rammed, has not moved. We're building ourselves into a complete stupid system. Until we get this sewage system sorted out, I cannot see how anyone plan to build 140 houses. So I get so angry about it. People are living with it, running through their gardens.
No, I can hear that, and I have got the photos. What we have, I'm trying to give an opportunity to see whether there's any questions around the documents that the appellants have put forward that you may have. Councillor.
Question is obviously regarding the standard timescale which we've got. We are in close communication with the Thames Down on this school, and they have not given us a timeline as regards the actual, because the upgrades which we have received, and I disagree with you that in fact nothing is happening until you actually have decided on this application or not, but there is work still continuing. And the work is actually a new sewer downstream from Bramley pumping station. It isn't just the pumping station that's the problem. It is the capacity of the line going down to the sewage works in Sherfield on Loddon. That is a big operation. Upgrading of Bramley number 1 SPS, the investigation stage. You can see us completing some surveys here either in late January or February. Hydraulic modelling of the network in the final stages. Results will be informed detailed design for upgrades to Bramley number 4. Works on the sewer network upstream of the Bramley, because we don't disagree, and Thames don't, there is an ingression of normal standard water into the system. But they don't know where it's coming from, and that is what they have to investigate west of the actual pumping station. So whatever you put west of the actual pumping station is going to have a gross impact on those houses downstream of, as can be seen from the photographs in Northview, Strawberry Fields, and Centenary Fields. These people are suffering as a result of the houses built west of pumping station.
And it is accepted. I mean, you know, I did ask that specific question, whether it's accepted that there is a significant problem.
So can I just come back on that? Now, I understand the anger at the situation. It's very important. It's understandable also that local residents may not fully appreciate the difference between the two parallel regimes, planning regime and the Water Industry Act regime. There's a lot of things water companies have done recently that have been in the news which few people would endorse. There's a legal duty which is unqualified under Section 94 of the Water Industry Act, which obliges every water company to provide, improve and extend such a system of public sewers to cleanse and maintain them so as to ensure the area is effectually drained, and various other associated obligations. And there are obligations on regulators and government to enforce those duties. Now, frankly, it may very well be that Thames Water hasn't properly complied with its legal duties in the past, and it may very well be that government and or regulators have turned a blind eye to that in the past. And if that's right, shame on them. Shame on them. I don't defend that for one moment. But it's not the job of this inspector to look into that, and still less is the job of my client to take the hit for that. And that's where this provision of the National Planning Policy Framework 188 is relevant, because it doesn't allow for, actually requires this process to assume that the Water Industry Act will operate effectively. That means either that Thames Water will comply with its duties in future, or if it doesn't, it will be enforced again. If they're not, I should add, by the way, there are mechanisms, not for me to advise people, there are mechanisms for ensuring legal duties are for holding feet to the fire. But it's not for us to take the hit for any shortcomings that may have happened in the past in terms of failures to comply with those duties. And so, since we understand the frustration, but the answer is not through this regime. And I think that's important. I had very similar discussion with local residents in this other inquiry about 8 months ago, Clappers Lane, where the similar points were made. So don't in any way seek to kind of belittle or undermine the frustration. I'm not going to say any more than that because what I think doesn't matter. But I do completely understand. But this is not the regime for holding Thames Water to account. It's the water industry regime.
Yes.
I don't dispute that, because in fact in the letters to actually yourselves and to Thames Water has said it is their obligation too. But at this stage they have said no further development west of the pumping station. That is in letters to yourself. It is here in a statement here. It sets out of section 7, which is in the actual communication you have with Basingstoke and Dean in respect. A couple of points in not agreement. They're centred around Stocks Farm site, being unable to discharge to our network until upgrades are complete.
The point is they're required to make those upgrades.
In regard to this. And in numerous letters to us all the time, that is the case.
Well, it may be an element of buck passing, frankly, by the water companies. That wouldn't be the first time, and it probably won't be the last. But the point is, there's the way that the regulatory and the legal regimes work is that they're under certain obligation of the Water Industry Act, and if they don't comply with them, then regulators are meant to hold them to account, and ultimately if regulators don't hold them to account, there may be scope for judicial review of regulators, frankly. But it's not for us to take the hit for any failings of the Water Industry Act regime.
It's for us as parish councillors to safeguard the actual quality of life of its residents.
Speak to Ofwat.
Not actually benefit the community in any way. From this point of view, no.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to move on once I give the council a chance to come back to discuss the conditions, because the conditions The principle of conditions is to make development acceptable, shorthand. But whether we're going to look at whether the conditions do meet that requirement of ensuring that there's no additional pressure on the system until the updates to the system have been made. Okay. The point of dispute is about whether there's a grey area between completion of the updates and delivery of houses. I did say I'd give the council a chance to come back on matters.
Just, I think my starting point was I attended the Thames Water meeting in early November, I think it was, to sort of push the matter on and for them to produce a statement. And there's no doubt in my mind it's an extremely serious issue. I left that call not with a great deal of confidence in terms of Thames Water. There was a lot of, out of the statement came the point that they wouldn't commence investigations until after planning permission had been granted. There was no cash, sort of, as it were, forward funding for the project. So it's all in the future, as it were. And then turning to the conditions, I think the council's position on the conditions and focusing on 29B, particularly about the temporary arrangements necessary. I think the first observation is it's clearly an either-or condition. So it's either or one, or it's either or two. It's the impreciseness, I think, that is probably a chief concern. So it comes across very much at the moment as open-ended. So where does it stop? Is it 12 months, 18 months, 24 months? Is it longer? How long do residents have to put up with it for? When will the end to the tankering be? So it's unknown, and it's in the hands of others. That's of concern. The other thing that struck us is if you go to, I think it's the second to last line of the condition, the LPA is excluded. So the agreement is with the sewage undertaker and the relevant developers. That's of concern also. And a very obvious point that, if the tankering does go on for 18 months, 2 years, 2 to 3 years, it's the impact on residents as well. There's a fairness to it, well, an unfairness to it. So I think the main concerns are probably the lack of preciseness, concerns around the LPA being excluded from the condition. That's my reading of it. And just, how long is it going to go on for?
So can I just
of course, Mr. Sargent.
pick one point up before we go back to the appellant? I mean, the point was made just now about section 188, paragraph 188, not 118, but paragraph 188. Yeah. Planning decisions should assume that these regimes will operate effectively. If we are to assume that Thames Water will operate effectively, then we should be assuming that they will have sorted it out within the timescales that they've said, they'll be operating to, in which case, according to the appellant, there isn't a need for temporary arrangements.
Okay, we're starting to unpack the conditions themselves, so let's go to them.
The first point made by Mr. Dawes was the timescale is unknown and out of the hands of the council. The timescale duration would be a matter for the details to be submitted and approved under the condition. First point. If it's out of question if it's out of the hands of the council, but if it's considered necessary to make the development acceptable, to give the council scrutiny over that, we can add the words "and the council" into the condition. So not simply agree between the sewage undertaker and the resident developer and the council.
To be fair, they typically are submitted to the council.
Yes,
it's up to the council to deal with their consultees to ensure complete conclusion
about that. We're far more fussed about having the opportunity to make our case in due course, should it be needed, which we think is unlikely, make our case for tankering. So not particularly fussed about it. It's an easy solution to that aspect of this concern expressed by Mr. Dawes. How long will residents have to put up with tankering? Well, there's not actually any evidence that tankering will cause any planning harm. So I'm not quite sure where that point goes. Mr. Berry explained that highways related issues of it. There's no other evidence before the inquiry that tankering would cause any relevant planning harm. But in any event, even if it's conceivable that there could be, despite that lack of evidence, that could all be scrutinised. But this is not we're not asking you to sell us the ticket now for tankering. We're asking you to enable us to make the case for it in due course, in the unlikely event we need to. As to Ms. Sargent's point that the logical consequence of paragraph 188 is you have to assume Thames Water to do the job. I mean, on one level, yes, and we're being generous by offering a condition. And that because actually the strict application of 188 is you assume it's done, there's no need for a condition because it's not necessarily make development acceptable. But the point is, in the context of a condition, plainly, the fact that Thames Water are under an obligation to get the job done, the fact that they have said they will comply with that obligation, and the fact that there is regulatory oversight of their duty, plainly provide you with a degree of comfort, having regard to 188, that there are mechanisms in place to secure that. So again, it goes to show that this condition is not in any way a pass to tankering. All we seek is the opportunity to make a case for a plan B temporarily for the first 50 units in the unlikely event that is necessary. And I go back to say, well, where is the evidence that there is a planning justification for completely ruling out that opportunity now? And there's absolutely none.
Yes, I've got a couple of concerns about those statements, Mr. Bennett. I mean, not least that if the system functioned, then we wouldn't have to rely on Grampian conditions for foul drainage. No, the reality is, and I think probably enshrined in the Industry Act, is an understanding that there are timetables and costs of these things, and there is a process of submission to Ofwat, etc. But timescales is the critical thing, and Grampians have long been seen as sorry, I mean, hope I'm not talking in double Dutch when I bring in Grampians as Grampian conditions in Scottish when I bring
yes. Negative conditions.
Because there's an acceptance and an understanding that there are necessary timeframes to bring in place improvements to the networks in order to deal with development.
I would resist the implication of the cost because there's no defence, but water companies aren't any obligation to say we can't comply with our Section 94 duties because we can't afford to. That's not open to them.
Well,
they may have said that. They have said that in the past. That's unlawful. They get billions of pounds of profits from the right to exploit their infrastructure, and with that comes the obligation to make sure it's shipshape.
No, but there is something around practicalities of delivery.
But I mean, again, I do reiterate 188. You know, it's not. We're happy to accept the Grampian condition, provided we say we would like that opportunity to make the case in the way that I've outlined in the event we need to. But when one looks at paragraph 188, it hasn't been tested in court yet. Appreciate which cuts both ways. But is the Water Industry Act a pollution control regime for foul effluent? Yes, clearly it is. Planning decisions should assume that regime will operate effectively. I mean, that is clearly what it says. And even if it hasn't in the past, and I accept there's obviously issues with the water companies' performances in the past with their duties. Paragraph 188 says planning decisions should assume the Water Industry Act regime will operate effectively. And that's very clearly the basis on which the framework is telling decisions to operate, because there is a parallel legal regime in which those obligations are able to be enforced. And if they haven't properly been enforced in the past, again, it may be that the regulators have acted unlawfully. But it's not for the planning system unduly to make up for shortcomings in the way that other systems have been under-enforced in the past. So, as I said, we're happy to accept the Grampian condition, but it does come back to, I cannot emphasise this enough, we are not asking to rule in tankering at this stage. We're asking to be able to make the case in the unlikely event it's needed with appropriate scrutiny. If you want to add the council in to be, we're not fussed about that at all. What What you're being asked to do is deny us that future opportunity should it be needed now, once and for all. Where is the evidential basis for that?
Okay,
Can I just,
of course.
on the detailed wording of the condition, it doesn't appear to me as though it is tightly enough drafted to capture what the limited extent of what the appellant says it's asking for. Because as I've understood their evidence this morning, their position is they're only going to seek tankering in relation. They even if they have their tankering, they wouldn't go beyond the 50th dwelling house, and they would wait for Thames Water to sort out until they get to number 51. And they're also, I think, saying that they will only seek tankering if there's a delay beyond the timescales indicated by Thames Water. But the condition, because it's on an either-or basis, theoretically, and I'm sure it will be said, well, obviously this isn't what we're going to do, but, we have to consider that there are rights to appeal around conditions. And so whatever is given to the appellant in the condition, they are entitled to rely on subsequently. And theoretically, under this condition, immediately upon granting planning permission, the appellant could start putting forward an infrastructure phasing plan and seeking temporary arrangements to discharge the sewage from the dwellings without waiting to find out where Thames Water have got to. And there's nothing either to say that this is only a solution in relation to 50 dwelling houses. And fine, I mean, I'm sure, I'm not suggesting bad faith on the part of the appellant. I'm sure they will, in due course, if they need to, ask for what they've said they'll ask for this morning, but there isn't actually anything in the condition to stop them from going beyond that. And if they do seek to go beyond what they're saying they'll ask for at the moment, there's a limit to which the council can actually refuse them, because this, where the condition gives you the right to do something, then ultimately you can appeal to the Secretary of State against that. So it may be that there are tweaks. I'm not suggesting this is something we couldn't, discuss this morning and consider the detail of the wording of the condition, but I can't see that either the point around the 50 dwelling houses or the point around this is a backstop in the event that Thames Water don't get on site, don't sort it out within 18 to 20 months. I can't see that the drafting of the condition actually picks those points up at the moment.
So that may be fair enough. I mean, I'm a little surprised to hear that for the first time now, a month after the statement of common ground was issued, because we haven't had any alternative form of words to condition B. The intention is as we set out, and if there need to be tweaks to the wording to tie it more firmly to that intention, I don't think there's any problem with that. It would be nice to know that was the council's view a little bit sooner, but
no, but sometimes these things work their way through. I mean, just to explain, what we're talking about here, have you seen the 3 proposed conditions that are floating around? Okay, fine. Let me just summarise them. The first is, I think, was probably a standard one from Thames Water.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably agreed between parties that doesn't go far enough in this case. The second one, as Mr. Banner has said, doesn't say they'll tanker. But it does say that the appellants would have the opportunity to put temporary arrangements to accommodate the discharge of foul sewerage from the additional dwellings without exacerbating sewage flooding for agreement. So that's submitting a scheme for a methodology to put housing on there. Now, I agree with you, Mr. Sergeant, that could be translated as the whole scheme coming forward of 140. Now, there are practical implications of that. The pumping station would have to be 3 times the size in order to have the storage, but you could argue that you could have 3 tankers a day emptying the smaller size. So there is perhaps something there that would need to be a bit more precise if the offer is 50. Now, I've read 50.
It's in my proof.
In a number of
it's in my evidence, sir.
That was in part saying that's because we can then deliver 50 houses within the 5-year.
As kind of like a total backstop, yes.
Yeah.
But yes, that's right.
It's to do with the capacity of what's on
Will have something to do with
Yes.
with achieving what would be the storage associated.
Yeah, that's
3 tankers a day to do the whole site.
Yeah. And then the third one is the councils, which effectively takes away the temporary arrangement,
Yes.
but does talk about an infrastructure phase plan that's really just more detail of points in time by which various elements of the scheme could come forward. So if Thames Water offer an improvement to the pumping station, but with a further capacity improvement to the sewerage work to come 4 years down the line, then it could associate with that.
Sorry, so just a point of clarification in this. In the condition, could it be stated who the protection of the sewage flooding is for? Is it the people in the new houses, you're taking it away because it can flow away from their properties? Or is it to protect the problem that we have in Bramley where people downstream see an increase? But do you see where I'm saying? It'd be hard to challenge if they say, well, we're not flooded, we are.
No, the implications are in a way for both, but the conditions do say without exacerbating sewage flooding in Bramley, not sewage flooding to the development. The capacity issues and the pumping station, if the pumping station could get into if it could get sewage away into the network, then the problems would remain within the village as opposed to pumping station. But there's likely to be receiving capacity problems that would lead to overflows within the development as well, would be my rough assessment. That is very difficult to say. It would be dependent on the amount of storage and the amount of flow time and the receiving flows. But it is in Bramley in the condition.
It may help. The following may help. The problem with it, as I understand it, and the residents would no doubt correct me, in periods of no rainfall, it's fine. It works, doesn't it? System. Yeah. So the problem is with the surface water. Recent rainfall patterns have only, probably made the situation worse. But what I'm trying to say is that surface water dominates the flow in the Bramley sewerage system. And on the proposed development, we're eliminating all the surface water and getting into the system. So as a percentage increase on the flow caused by our development going through the sewer network, it's a tiny percentage of what it's trying to cope with under storm conditions. So in periods of dry weather, you can get away with discharging, and that's what we mean by adjusting when the sewage pumping station pumps out. And
I don't think there isn't sufficient average to manage that.
Still have to have tankering and standby. So that's not an overall solution. But I'm just trying to illustrate that we're only talking about a very tiny increase in the overall flows from connecting the development.
Yeah, I mean, if I can translate that, I think very quickly by saying, historically, sewage network used to be combined. They used to take lots of surface water into them. Has its benefits and its disadvantages. Benefits in terms of dilution, disadvantages in terms of volume. For a number of years now, surface water has been excluded from foul flows in new development. So all of the runoff from the roofs and the hard standing is all managed on site and goes nowhere near the sewage network. One of the problems in Bramley, as I've read the evidence I have before me, is the high levels of infiltration, surface water that's getting into the system, hence the triggering of heavy rain causing problems within the system.
It's not actually heavy raining. It's just
that's a continuous period of rain.
You get days and days.
I think that's fair.
Medium rain. Heavy storms, fine. That's the surface water. It's sustainable. We've been aware of this for years. 2009 or something. We had a meeting with Thames Water while we were preparing the NDP up in Reading, and we learned all about grampians and things like that. And we watched all the conditions being imposed on the developments. We saw no improvement. Fair enough. Possibly the climate change has got something to do with it. But, is it just the more housing? I live in a house that was built in 1980. That doesn't put any water into the sewage system. That all goes to soakaways. And as far as I'm aware, every house, certainly since then, has had to have soakaways.
Yes, but there remains a problem with what I used to call misconnections in the day I was writing leaflets on those things, which was in the early 90s. Misconnections where over time people's machines, etc., goes to the easiest standpipe, which goes into the system. Too much detail.
So one thing here, tankering occurs after the event, not before. In fact, if people suffer from sewage overspill, then the tankers come in.
Oh, you mean Thames Water's current tankering provision?
The people are suffering, and then it's cleared away, but it's too late. Because in fact, the gardens are flooded and there's sewage coming through the shower units and sinks and the rest of it.
That's a slightly different issue because that's about the response and the response times of Thames from their reaction to the system. But I accept that the problem is manifesting itself very clearly within the village.
To my minor thing, I mean, the advent of the 200 houses we've recently had at St James's Park, now that feeds into the system, and that had conditions about certain houses completing drainage works. None of it was ever done. That may well be Thames's fault. If we're going to blame somebody, these things were not done. So we're putting more sewage into the system. The 60s or whenever it was, 70s, when drainage and that was less well controlled, causes the flooding problem. The development of Centenary Fields was, and I sat on the DC committee, we fought hard to try and stop it because it's so close to the brook and the floodplain, and the various areas were there, that it was not a predicted problem, but it was very borderline, and sadly that's where we see the issue. And the tanks that we refer to were put in to solve a flooding problem from new developments from the old infrastructure back in the 90s. And it was 2009, there we are, right, sorry, 2009, later. And so that dealt with a problem then. And we have had this, I mean, what I'm really saying is Bramley is full. We are really requesting here that we don't put any more load in till the problem's sorted. It's not actually saying don't build your houses, don't build them until it's sorted. Infrastructure first is actually something this council has had a motion on to make sure in our plans that we have infrastructure first. We're not in control of that.
No, I appreciate that. Although that is what the conditions are trying to achieve. That's expressly what the conditions are trying to achieve. Let's just deal with the point of dispute then. The conditions are trying to say no occupation of a dwelling until confirmation that the necessary works have been completed.
They could have the houses built and occupied for a long time, from what I've seen.
Well, that's a risk that the developer might take. They equally might hold off building houses and spending the money on those assets until they're confident that it's been delivered. But the condition, if enforced, should prevent any occupation, therefore any contribution of additional outflows prior to, it says without exacerbating existing sewage flooding in Bramley. So there would have to be a meeting of minds that additional flow has been addressed by the additional capacity created either through changes to the pumping system, pumping station, or to the downstream sewer, which might be the particular problem here, that they can't get it away from the existing storage in the pumping station.
You have this dilemma then, but Thames Water are, on the one hand, duty bound to provide it, but their technical department is saying we can't in this timescale. This coming forward, you know, for the discussions we've had, they've said 4 years, 3 years.
That's not what the evidence for you says.
From their project approval.
That's not what the evidence says, though. And this is
where we have this conflict between, we respect the people that are liaised in planning to the engineers that have to do the work.
I mean, there's a,
It's very difficult for us to be piggy in the middle, but we
Appreciate that.
and the statement of common ground, which is signed by Thames Water, says the required network reinforcement solution is not considered complex enough to sit outside their standard timescale of 18 to 20 months. And that's the evidence signed by them.
So the point that we need to address, there's two. One is for me entirely, and that's which of those conditions should be preferred in light of the expectations of planning guidance and statutory duties. But there is something for us to discuss so that I'm sure that I have the 29B that, and I'm not taking the council's acceptance that 29B is the right way to go, but let's have your involvement in a discussion as to how it could work to address perhaps the issues, Ms. Sargent, that you identified, so that I can go away with the 3 conditions to consider perhaps as parties are most happy with them, if not completely happy with them. So we're talking about 29B. Is there a methodology by which that can incorporate a hierarchy?
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is only were Thames Water to be shown to be failing to meet a timetable. I'm not quite sure where I'll get that from. That the temporary arrangement scheme could be submitted to the council for council consideration. And is there anywhere in that condition that the understanding is that that would be for a scheme of up to 50 houses, as opposed to the whole scheme with increased tankering and more storage put in? And
Can I answer? So
so I'm offering those as questions and just seeing what.
Those things ought to be capable of being reflected in words. Okay.
Yeah.
Not beyond the wit of mankind to come up with a condition that spells that out. I don't pretend we have a problem with that. Whether we in the council seek to redraft it, or whether we, if you get there in your mind map, whether we sort of say we're happy for you to word it in such way as you prefer. But you don't mind, if you like something, I'm sure Miss Sargent's team and our team can put something together, or we're happy to leave it to you. I don't mind either way.
Well, let's just have the quick discussion, see if there's any thoughts. Ms. Sargent, you raised, actually, Mr. Dawes raised one point, Ms. Sargent raised the other. Have you thought about how that condition, again, no prejudice that you think it's the right condition to use, but if it was the condition that I chose, how to make it more robust from your point of view?
I mean, the first point, which is not difficult at all, obviously, is to add a reference to the local planning authority.
Of course. Submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority.
Then
All conditions, in fact, require that. So because
That's exactly right.
but all 29A, B, and C all don't have reference to the local planning authority, including the council's own conditions. So that has to be included to all of them.
Yeah.
Not least because we don't get the right to appeal otherwise.
Yeah.
and then I think there's no issue with 1. So it would be, I suppose, after where 2 appears in the condition, it needs to say something to reflect the sort of temporal point about this isn't something that we should be contemplating unless and until Thames Water's timescales have slipped.
Isn't it in the or? So it's that point where it says,
Yeah.
you can do this or that.
I
Suggest that either could be done at the same
No, I think what Ms. Rod is saying, that there's kind of or and then another or, because the council obviously accepting in 29C that you've got the or in terms of an infrastructure phasing plan.
Yes.
So that part of it is accepted. It's kind of, it's another or.
So if you could have the council's condition and then after the infrastructure phasing plan, perhaps have, and if necessary, or and if required, or at a, it's very difficult to put a date or anything in
Well,
the condition. It just,
I mean, yes, I mean, we need to be careful. I'm trying to go back to the statement of common ground because Thames Water obviously comment about this. While they don't accept the tankering, that was the point. They did accept that there might be, if a timing challenge, and I've just lost the statement of common ground because
they said with regard to interim measures, a matter of dispute, may have precise wording. Thames Water expressed their position concerning tankering not being an acceptable solution. Is it at that bit? Oh, I mean, okay, 7.2 says, in the unlikely event Thames Water unable to meet their obligations made in an infrastructure phasing plan. So you could have the infrastructure phasing plan if Thames Water do not meet agreed measures.
Yes,
Then submission of
that's exactly.
Is that
That's my understanding of where Thames Water are coming from in the statement of common ground, in that I think they're saying we anticipate that the timings will be agreed in the phasing plan, and basically, so yes, that would then give a reference point for, if that doesn't happen, then tankering. The case could be made for tankering under conditions.
You ideally, and so this is why I'm slightly loath to draft it on the hoof. I mean, imagine a scenario where, just for the sake of argument, obviously, for the sake of argument, Thames, in the phasing plan, Thames Water said we'll sort it out by month 24. And by month 21, it was obvious that it wasn't going to be sorted by month 24 because they hadn't started the works or whatever. For the sake of argument, it would seem sensible to allow the ability to submit the arrangements for consideration and approval for the Plan B in advance of month 24. Not to say to start those arrangements, but to submit them so there wasn't a time lag, if you see what I mean. I'm not expressing that very well, but I hope it's clear what the point I'm making. So that then by month 24, Plan B could come into place, as opposed to by month 20, it was only after month 24 that you could submit Plan B for approval, which is why I say I'm a little loath to kind of, certainly on the hoof, over-engineered, no pun intended, the condition.
Yeah.
Ultimately, whatever submission has to be justified. I too understand, I'm absolutely fine with having additional words to keep it as focused as possible, but there is a slight danger of becoming too over-engineered.
Okay, well, let's not get it to a final version, but let me just see if I've got a feel for what it may look like. No development occupied. Okay, so no occupation until the network reinforcement works are delivered. It says, and the existence of sufficient sewerage capacity is confirmed in writing by the sewerage undertaker. Yeah, I have to think about whether that actually meets the needs here, because in other places it's expressed as sufficient to accommodate without exacerbating sewage flooding in Bramley.
Be involved in that, because we get the reports of sewage flooding before here, Thames Water normally take it from us rather than from the residents.
Yeah, this is a slightly different thing. This is about Thames Water saying, we have done X, Y, and Z, and that has given this quantity additional into the capacity of the network that is sufficient to accept the flows from 140 houses. So it's not the actual failures, it's about delivery of a design scheme that should.
It's very clear on the proposal is they've got to put big pipes between Bramley and, there's a quite, if you haven't delivered it, it's not fixed, it's quite tangible objects to kick off.
Oh yes, I think there's some big engineering needed. Okay. So the network reinforcement works necessary to accommodate the development are operational. Or, and I'm not quite sure what triggers the or where it's triggered, or whether the infrastructure phasing plan should just be a requirement of the scheme, because Thames Water will always have a timescale. And any delivery because you need something that says Thames Water will deliver these improvements by, and this is an absolute random date, I'll make it even more random, 2024, 2025, 2026.
Yeah.
A point at which the condition would say, if the infrastructure phasing plan cannot be delivered as approved, then a temporary then a scheme for temporary.
I mean, I wonder whether you add the word
Can be
contingency. If you say temporary contingent, it's sort of implicit in the word contingency that they are
Yeah,
before. Yeah,
but that would give a hierarchy of Thames Water have actually Thames Water have done what they are
yeah.
committed to in terms of, I think, the feedback they've given to the parish council and the feedback they've given to the appellants here to deliver enhancements to the network such that flows can be accepted, their statutory duty. You would hope that that is resolving the problems in the village existing. That's top of the hierarchy. The concern is we don't know when that is. So there probably should be an infrastructure phasing plan because they might say phase 1 is increased storage in the village to deal with centenary fields. We can accept an additional X flow. That's 50 houses. Again, don't take that. And then the second phase is the downstream capacity that will allow for acceptance of a further 100. There's an infrastructure phasing plan, generally, I think. But yeah, and then the third in the hierarchy of that is where it can be demonstrated that the infrastructure phasing plan cannot be met, then a scheme for a temporary contingency arrangement may be submitted for approval.
Yeah, maybe contingency scheme and timescales.
I think the scheme would have to have timescales.
Actually say that.
Yeah.
Yes.
The final piece would be, I think, a separate sentence, something saying, because this is on the basis that you have accepted that tankering is, something that should be available. There ought to be something that says any contingency arrangement involving the tankering of waste off-site. I can't draft on the Hoof either, but something to basically say that if you're using tankering, then you can only occupy the first 50 houses.
To make it explicit so that we don't have an argument at a later date when the appellants come forward with a wonderful plan for something else. But I know that there are practical implications of being able to have more than 50 houses without a proper mains connection. The old history of assisting with 399 many years ago still scratches at the back of my head saying, how long can you have a cesspit arrangement in place? But okay, what are we going to do with 29B? It's clear that I think both parties think that there'd be risks of me brushing away and making up something that may not have captured all of your concerns. So perhaps we should ask that a little bit of negotiation goes on to come up with wordings. Now we've talked about what the wording could look like. Fully accept from the council's perspective that this, I don't think that's resolving your in principle concerns about a temporary scheme that might involve tankering. But were I to go through that process of looking at guidance, policy and statute, decide that it is acceptable to use that condition, then I'm sure you want it as robust as it can be.
Can I suggest, if it's acceptable, council, that maybe Mr. Dawes, if Mr. Dawes, obviously on appropriate advice from the sergeant, were to liaise with Mr. Ross during the course of this afternoon?
I'm obviously very happy to liaise. My only concern is I have an absolute enormous amount of work to do on my closing submission.
Of course.
And
Well, I think that's why you're suggesting it's Mr. Dawes.
Yes, I'm very sorry, and I'm going to be completely upfront about this. I don't have any capacity this afternoon to review the work.
No, I don't think I've got either Mr. Dawes or Mr. Ross on the site visit, so they have an opportunity to.
They could on a without prejudice basis, and then we could look at it as and when. But in the meantime, on a without prejudice basis, if they could work something up that's subject to then subsequent legal advice.
I would say give me something, and if I feel the necessity to take it further, I'll take it further in my head. But
I'm sure I can find time to cast an eye on it, but I think that will be tomorrow morning, sir. To be blunt.
That's fine. I'll tell you, if we get to that situation, you say to me it'll come in on Tuesday next week, I'll find a way of making that happen.
Can I suggest that Mr. Dawes has the first go, as we've we've provided that condition. Obviously, Mr. Dawes got some observations. So if we wait to hear from Mr. Dawes, if you send it to Asher.
Just have in mind that any changes that might come to B should probably be reflected in C, albeit without the third stage of the hierarchy, if we're changing the first two.
I think that's fair enough. Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That is the condition on sewerage. We've parked it a little bit, but we've had the debate around it. Let me just re-emphasise, talking about conditions were the scheme allowed by me is done entirely without prejudice, both on my side and on the council's. But I will not have another chance to have these discussions once I go home and start to mull over the merits or otherwise of the case. Are we happy to move on to looking at?
I think so. So in which case, I get to invite the conditions. The other conditions. So Mr. Ross, yes, we can discharge Mr. Bradley. And, sorry. I couldn't resist. Yes, the conditions first, actually.
Okay, conditions that were submitted. I had 28, I'm setting aside the 29th, 28 conditions for me. I'm going to say now that while there has been some discussions around other conditions, they're not for discussion at this session. I know the position of parties effectively on that, and I'm happy just to leave that one to one side. So what I've done is I've reviewed the 28 that were put before me. My understanding is that there was agreement between the parties on this.
That is correct, sir.
And some are very simple and easy to agree. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Always helpful to have the standard outline condition requirements. They're almost ordered in terms of pre-commencement, pre-slab, pre-occupation. Nice to have seen.
Yes. You can thank the council for that, sir. That's actually
But I have just one or two quick questions as we go through. And if anyone else has an issue with a condition, just flag it up as we go. Fairly brutal in the way we do this. I'll just say, number 5, what it is, if I've got a problem, or if I haven't, and I'll contend with it. Number 5 was the construction environmental management plan, one of the longer ones that I've seen.
The reason for that was there were 3 different conditions requiring different elements, and what we agreed that the council agreed, and we just amalgamated them because there's some that came from the environmental health officer, some that came from the highway authority, some from the council. We just put them all together. Yes, it is long, but I think our preference was we have it as one condition where everything is, and all the residents know that condition, rather than having 3 different ones slightly overlapping. I think that's fair.
Yeah, no, I agree. That was where we got to.
Good, thank you very much. 6 was summarised by me as van size and servicing plan. We obviously had Mr. Bevis's evidence about the nature of the access, and this is to secure that the Tesco Extra that is to be built on the site serviced by HGVs. Sorry, unfair.
No, I don't think so.
But to ensure that there's no more than 7.5 ton van servicing the site, so I don't think any issue with that. 7, why have I put slight type? Oh, there's a double until. Obviously, 7 around the pedestrian cycle connections in the surrounding network is something that's picked up in highways elements of the unilateral undertaking. But I'm just wondering if that is the case, that there's duplication there.
No, I think when we get to the unilateral, that is relates to how they are delivered.
Right.
And this is more about what is being delivered rather than how. This will show the plan, and what the unilateral has is the agreement with the highway authority as who's going to deliver it, when they're going to be delivered, etc.
And there's the section 2
technical elements of the unilateral. Okay. The kind of that's my understanding. So I don't think there is duplication.
Okay, because those improvements are shown on Plan 006.
They are.
It's not listed.
But it's not the plan for determination, sir.
Thank you. Tree and hedgerow protection plan is condition 8. No problem with that. 9, archaeology. They're arable fields, but obviously you've got surrounding listed buildings. Sometimes you can argue whether there's necessity on arable sites for such things, but I don't think I can take that here with such presence of listed buildings surrounding.
No, we think it's totally appropriate.
10, that's just,
Yeah,
I think, mitigation.
Yes.
11, contaminated land, sort of same arguments can be raised in relation to.
If you remember, there is a demolition of a building as.
Oh, so what?
So, while it's unlikely, I certainly would suggest that is required. And while it is arable, I'm not going to comment as to what potentially could be on site historically.
Yeah. 12 was verification.
Yes.
Surface water drainage. Quick question on 13 and 14, surface water drainage. Fairly comprehensive as I read them, linking back to the proposed drainage strategy, but of course, once layout and housing, etc., comes forward, there'll be a better understanding of the necessities there. No obvious implementation element within that. I'm afraid it's one of those conditions that can give you a lovely scheme. And indeed, a long-term maintenance arrangement for said lovely scheme.
Yes, clearly. Yes, 13 should have.
I think we could just add,
yes,
shall be implemented.
Should be carried out in accordance with the approved details, and the same in relation to 14. Scheme should be carried out and maintained in perpetuity in accordance with the approved details.
Yeah, that sounds.
Absolutely.
Dormouse ecological studies. Oh, just a very quick question from me. I think the surveys would have been 2020 informing ecological reports. It's an outline scheme. We might not see work on site with various issues for a few years. I'm increasingly seeing conditions that require pre-construction surveys to ratify the ecological surveys. I don't know if that was in the thoughts of the council or is necessary. I'm not promoting it because I never promote excess conditions unless they're absolutely necessary. And they may not be with quite a lot of ecological information on the table and done relatively recently.
I mean, usually take a sort of 3-year span for ecological survey in terms of their lifespan. Is that what you're suggesting?
It's what I'm suggesting is they were probably done in 2020 initially.
I mean, I'm happy for that to be added into the condition if it does. But I think, would it not be redone at the reserve matter stage if necessary?
I mean, clearly, it's so driving. If it relates to protected species, it's illegal to remove them anyway. So,
another one of those adding dates and suggesting.
No, not really. It's something that raises its head occasionally. I mean, quite clearly, there's lots of history of inspectors saying if there's no surveys, no permission. The outcome of that is that the world moves on and the world changes and its surveys can go out of date. Now, I suppose I'll keep it simple. I'm presuming the way these conditions were written that people didn't think those surveys were likely to go out of date. Me being it's a horrible phrase, devil's advocate sometimes in these sorts of circumstances is just saying, in light of the discussions we've had around the timescales of this development, are you concerned that they may go out of date? I would not add conditions if it wasn't felt absolutely necessary and could be justified.
This isn't something I've discussed with my team, but I'm aware of 2 things. First of all, that I have seen some suggestions from one of the environmental bodies that actually the survey period of 3 years is a bit generous and it should be 2.5 or something. But anyway, from my view, we're already approaching 3 years. I'm also aware there has been case law in the last year around the Habitats Directive, which has taken kind of positive obligations on local authorities in a direction I wasn't expecting it to go. You will surmise that I may have been involved on the losing side in that litigation. But my view is that the most robust position would be to put something in just requiring it. I'm not saying it would be a full scale update, but just to sort of sense check to see at least whether the conclusions are still valid.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think, the surveys are, still, I've seen the same advice on the 2.5 years. So I think it would fall within the applications for approval of reserve matters shall include a verification report or an update report.
What's sometimes done is a sort of walkover to sense check whether any scope for
the expectation doesn't.
brand new
I don't
surveys.
think the expectation is brand new surveys in the way that these conditions are written, but
Just verification.
Yes,
Yeah, verification is quite the right word, isn't it?
verification that the information contained in those surveys
Remains valid.
continues to be valid.
Yeah.
Yes, could that be linked to reserve matters? The reserve matters shall include. It's not explicit what those reserve matters
No,
may be because it covers the whole site. Shall undertaking the recommendation of procedures in the ecological assessment. You could have just as part of the condition, which shall include verification, which shall include prior to construction verification.
Well, it does need to include prior to, it needs to be timed, clearly.
Because that would be a condition that could ride with the outline permission right through to the construction phase, not tied to reserve matters.
Yes,
But saying
I get that.
prior to construction.
Yes. Yes,
I think it's slab levels being used through here.
it has, yes, to avoid the,
Use that same.
yes, yes.
What was the final? Did you suggest because if slab levels come in, potentially we've lost what could have been picked up? That's your implication. That just
Yes.
Well, yeah, no,
That's-
he could have had hedges removed. He could have had soil stripping.
I mean,
There's no hedge removal, is there? There's hedge addition.
Yeah.
Sorry.
to be fair,
It may need to be prior to.
it might be
site.
prior, yes. It may
Valid.
to be.
Okay, the light 17 was lighting scheme, wasn't it? I didn't have a particular issue with that. 18. Oh, refuse and recycling, no particular issues with that. 19 and 20, parking generally and parking on community building. Well, no, so doesn't that feel like a reserve matters layout issue? But why is it in here for me? Stunned silence. It's if this was a detailed scheme, then absolutely no question we'd be securing the parking on the site. But once layout is set,
no, but because one of those standard conditions.
I mean,
and then you get an annoying inspector that comes along with.
I think, to be fair to the local authority, it probably isn't one that was. This has probably come from the county council, the highway authority, and obviously the district will always include the conditions that come. I mean, so I think when we had the discussion, That's was suggested by the Highway Authority, and we you know.
But you are right, reserve matters also separate.
Yes, it would be the road network, parking areas, the
Yes.
houses, and you could then at that point secure with a condition, having at that point secured the appropriate level of provision too, which isn't currently. Yeah. Okay. 21, water efficiency, 110 litres. It is. 22, mechanical ventilation heat recovery. I think it's MVHR. Internal noise levels. I'll make that change, don't worry. I have no real problem with that. 23, sustainable design. Laudable. Actually expected, I think, in line with all requirements at present. Is it necessary, I suppose, is the question to the council? Is this something that you're putting on to be confident that you're going to get something, or are you seeking something over and above standards? Because obviously you've dealt with water use in an express condition earlier. I mean, increasingly local plans have policies in that say you must have PV, you must have electric car charging points, etc., etc. I don't think any of us probably lose sleep that that's the expectation of what should come through. It's just difficult to know exactly to what, you know, there's lots of policy references for me there, but you can be bold. You can just say, yes, sir, we want it in.
Well, we obviously would like it in. It is a push, obviously, towards more sustainable.
Yep.
You know, I think that's something we should be encouraging.
Yeah, don't disagree.
Yeah, and also supporting our council.
Mr. Ross.
No, I fully support the inclusion of this type of vision.
24 was landscape reserve matters to come to Hardenstoff landscaping plan. Again, we got this sort of crossover with the unilateral, but I've read the unilateral as ensuring the long-term delivery of the landscape management plan, and that this is securing a landscape management plan, which admittedly is a reserve matters issue, but you're giving some, I was about to use the term parameters, I'm going to avoid it, some expected requirements of that plan. Is that fair?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. Where have we got? 25. I think same. Oh no, just not the same issue quite, but that's just to ensure that we don't have buildings higher than expected on the site. I can accept that. 26. Oh, there's already a plans condition. Why have I got 26? That's what my note said.
Yeah, secures the plan, but it was a little bit further in terms of securing the visibility.
Yes. If I read my note further, it says, why do you have the first sentence?
Yes, I agree. Obviously, yeah, build out in accordance. That's the first one. I think it's probably there to give reference and make the whole condition clearer.
Okay. But yeah, the visibility display makes sense to me. That's fine. 27 was about private roads and future adoption, I'm guessing. In 28, the acceptable, adaptable housing, M1, etc. Yeah, is in standards, but
yes, it does. Yeah, yes, I think it provides clarity.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I think that takes us to the end of the conditions that were recommended. There's always a nervous moment when I say at the end of the condition sessions, following the discussions that we've had in the room, is there any other conditions that people might want to introduce? I've said we've set aside the one discussed a couple of days ago.
Yes, and subject to, say, you said yesterday about how you would proceed should you get to that stage in the thought process.
Yeah.
That, and nothing further. Okay, thank you.
Good. Thank you very much.
Of course.
In those conditions, which obviously I'm not reading, are we conditioning the indicative site layout, or is that going to be reserved matters for the entire layout?
Well, it is reserved matters, but we had a bit of a discussion on it yesterday. And I've given the position that there's a thing called a parameters plan. So there's parameters that effectively set out likely numbers, likely positioned. It shall not do X, Y, or Z. That isn't conditioned at present, and the council have noted that, and that has been their position, that it hasn't been secured in conditioned to this point. I have said that if I feel that it must be, that I would go to the parties to ask for their position on the inclusion of that as a condition.
The reasoning is that obviously this has not come to DC with officers' report, obviously. And is the layout of the housing and buffer zones between existing housing and new housing rather than land that's there, whether there's room for wiggle room, we're not ruling that out.
No, unavoidably, it's an outline application, and outline applications aren't necessarily always delivered in accordance with the illustrative plan.
There's no condition about respect to the conservation area. This must be like this must be like that.
No, and it's always that grey area between how far an outline application becomes a detailed application. I've said I'll have a think about the necessity of it, but I will allow the parties to comment before I would impose it as a condition.
Our position is, just for the public, we don't think that's necessary. The council agree. If the inspector thought it was necessary, we don't oppose it. The council would like the opportunity to comment on that turn of events should the inspector think that's necessary. I think that's a fair summary of where we got to, so isn't it?
Thank you very much. Let's take it a little longer than I expected. A short break, and then we'll have a look at the...
Yes, well, and for that, Mr. Andrew Morgan, who's partner in DSC Beechcroft, he's going to be taking a hot seat and talking through the 106 insofar as you'd like to.
Thank you very much. Again, I don't think I need to go too far in terms of detail, but something to think about just over the break, and you can give me a really simple and quick answer. I caused a little bit of trouble by just check it. I'd always check that all those with an interest in the land are bound by the
names.
Jeanette Filson appeared on the front page, but doesn't appear on the signatory page. And I did question the owners of Selworthy, so you can have just a quick think about. I'm sure there's a reason, but obviously Selworthy is a plot of land that is part of the Red Line and is to be delivered as part of the scheme. And I know it's tenuous, the link, because obviously they will have no interest in developing the scheme, but
also various questions about the management of the skate park, etc. If insofar as you're interested in the answer to those.
So that's something if you think about, and we'll pick it up when we come back in, and I'll pick up any council concerns on natural after break. See you all back at 25 past, please. I don't think we've got more than 20 minutes on that, and then we'll be able to get away. Thank you very much. Right, ladies and gents, welcome back. 25 past. Final session for today will be on the unilateral undertaking submitted initially prior to the inquiry as a draft, a later draft submitted and shared on the inquiry website, on the council's website, so that people could see the offering that was made within that undertaking, both in terms of delivery of elements of the scheme and delivery of some contributions to support infrastructure in the area. I made some early comments on it, and I've got just a couple more to go, but it's I think helpful, just again because of our online links, but just is it easy to summarize very quickly what's
so yes, it is actually there by reference to probably
the table, the SIL compliance table.
SIL compliance table or the statement of common ground.
Oh yeah,
because it covers the same
same
material, probably in a more high level way. Can I just pass to you, sir, a clean copy of the very latest, because it probably is an easier document to read.
Okay, that would be helpful because I'm online with
printed the annexes, but the annexes haven't changed from the version that you'd have received electronically, nor it was publicised by the local authority. So by type, sir, delivery of a policy compliant level of affordable housing, 40% between affordable rent and intermediate housing. Also that quantum of affordable housing comprising 25% first homes. Those elements of the 106 UU are agreed. Multifunctional green space, so that falls part within the overall on-site open space provision. There are references in there to the minimum amounts of on-site open space and also multifunctional green space. The skate park, so will form part of the on-site open space, and its maintenance as part of the open space will be dealt with by the estate management company, the details of which will be approved by the council. Allotments, similarly, mechanism for the submission approval of the details of those and their delivery. They will be subject to an election by the developer, whether they are to be managed, maintained, operated by the estate management company, or whether the Bramley Parish Council, as of just yesterday, we've accepted that they could be an alternative recipient. And alternatively, for complete flexibility, so there's the any other party which the council might approve as suitable. Landscape management plan, so you referenced it in terms of the condition, yes, but this features in the 106 in terms of the delivery and in perpetuity maintenance, more relevant to the role of the estate management company, again as the custodian of that, and making sure that the areas are maintained in accordance with that in perpetuity plan, in accordance with the landscape specification and the play space specification. Management company, that's approved as part and parcel of compliance with the on-site open space provisions. The community building, that is, well, it will, of course, come through reserve matters in terms of what it is, but the size, location and the specification of that will be something to be submitted and approved by the local authority and thereafter to be delivered. The community building, in terms of marketing, because it includes within its definition now the terms of occupation, i.e. On what terms would any of the users, occupiers of that space, be they permanent or be it on a more ad hoc arrangement. We're talking leases or tenancies or other terms upon which the space could be occupied. So that detail will come forward as well as part of the submission. Bowling green, consistent with the reference in the neighbourhood plan, there is to be an exercise to identify a potential for the delivery of that. And the obligation in the Section 106 is that from the commencement of the development to the occupation of the 70th dwelling, which would be a significant period of time, to use reasonable endeavours to market that opportunity, either for the transfer of what would be an identified area of land for the delivery of the bowling green together with clubhouse, or whether it could be a turnkey solution potentially. But the obligation addresses and goes no further than the aspirations of the local and the neighbourhood plan, to actually undertake a period of consultation, which in performance terms means the marketing and identification of potential end user takers of that facility. The travel plan agreed standard provisions with the county council. Access from the street, so this is the primary vehicular access to the site. That is dealt with in the unilateral undertaking to secure the entering into of the highways agreement, the statutory highways agreement, pursuant to which those works would be carried out. The same applies in relation to pedestrian crossing works as well. There are two. The definition of highway works in the 106 is twofold, so the site access and then some pedestrian upgrade works as well. Biodiversity management plan. The 106 includes the provision of that plan to ensure that habitat, as defined within it, those spaces are delivered and managed and maintained to realise the value of the habitat space. Public right-of-way contribution, substantial contribution sought by the county council for some £341,000 comprised of capital as well as maintenance sums. That is agreed with regard to what if it were to be found a compliant planning obligation, would be the drafting for it. However, we don't agree that there is that justification principle, and so we would be inviting you, based on potentially discussion during this session, to consider whether it does pass the tests. I would, in that particular respect, draw your attention to the blue pencil clause that we have in the 106, which only gives enforcement or enforceability to the content of the 106 in principle, and to the extent that you find in your decisions that those planning obligations are planning obligations and meet all aspects of the test. Travel plan bond approval fee and monitoring fees, again, acceptance of standard county provisions for those items. School travel plan contribution of £42,000 towards preparation and implementation of school travel planning for a specified number of schools. Completion of Section 278 works. This relates to those highway works that I mentioned, site access and pedestrian improvements. Employment and skills plan, local planning authority standard provisions to ensure that items such as apprenticeships are secured and training opportunities and skills improvements are available during the construction phase of the scheme. And those are by type, the planning obligations which the 106E deals with.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful just to set it out, but also to set out, I think, what I understood to be the point of disagreement around the public footpath network contributions. Does that summarise the council's concerns, or are there other concerns with the document here?
I'll hand over to Ms. Greaves, who is, the council's lawyer who's been dealing with this. The public right-of-way issue, you're correct to identify as, a dispute. I think as far as the council, our understanding is that this was raised yesterday. So county highways aren't able to come and talk to you because of the timing. So we've agreed that we'll, put their case forward for them as best we can. So that's one issue. And then there are other drafting points that I know we've been discussing with the appellant, certainly this week. So I'll hand over to Ms Greaves to explain to you what those points are.
So on the first point, we do have the county council's leases asking for the rights of way contribution. I'm happy to let you have a copy of that. I did speak to them yesterday and they couldn't attend to the inquiry today, and the solicitor didn't have instructions to do so. Our other points really relate to the community building obligation.
Okay.
Clause 2.1, we've got a preference that the council should have to agree in writing the specification and location rather than it being expressed as the owner has agreed. We would normally expect to approve these details.
It may just help if I, rather than we get to the end, just so if I respond to each point in turn when it's made, if that's helped.
Yes, let me just turn up. It's 6 schedule, isn't it?
Correct.
So let me just turn it up. Okay, so let me just park the contribution to the public footpath network, and I'll come back to that afterwards. But if we're dealing with specific small drafting points in it, let's deal with those now. The community building.
Building, sir.
Yep.
So 2.1. Okay. We would want to express that the council has agreed in writing the specification, location and size, because this is unilateral. There's no arbitration clause in the event of a dispute, so the council should be able to approve these details.
I think this is a nil-sum point, Sam, because the reality is that what the 106 draftings identify is an outcome, and the event that is secured by the restriction on occupation, which is at 2.1, is that 2.1 A and B need to have happened. And I don't think there's any operative difference in defining the outcome for enforceability, whether it was bilateral or unilateral, to the turn of phrase that's used at 2.1A.
The owner has agreed with the council.
So
the specification, as opposed to the council has approved in writing. Does that flow to 21B? The owner has agreed with the council a
yes, sir.
Marketing plan.
From my perspective, so it is a stylistic difference. I don't attach any legal difference to that turn of phrase because of how the obligation operates in the context of A and B being events or outcomes that need to be achieved. Fundamentally, it's 2.1, which is the thing that secures what compliance looks like.
Well, I agree with you to an extent. It's until, so it's contingent on A and B being fulfilled. I guess who is the arbiter of whether A and B are fulfilled?
So it should be the council should be the arbiter.
Well, there won't be agreement. Is obviously
It's a two-way thing.
It is a two-way thing. It'd be a process. So you would be submitting details to the point where there is agreement, and what that would look like if you described it from the council's perspective would be approval. But the outcome is actually the same event. It might be an iterative process in the sense that the first turn of a submission that you made wasn't 100% of what the council wanted to see, but the reality is that it wouldn't be agreed or it wouldn't be approved until that had run its course.
I suppose the concern is, what if there's a dispute over whether agreement has been reached? Can there be dispute over whether agreement has been reached? Because if the council state no, then it hasn't.
But that's the teeth of not having submitted information, in principle, to the extent that secure the council's agreement to it. The limit here inherently is because we're proceeding by way of a unilateral undertaking. It cannot.
We can't bind the council to any action.
We can't. Nor can we even attach words like acting reasonably to their behaviour.
No.
The buck stops with whether or not what they receive they are happy with, and then you get past go if they issue either they agree with you or they issue something that says it's an approval, which is to the effect that they agree with what the submission is. My only, this isn't really a point that I would want to spend any real time on, but the only reason that we are limiting the amount of red ink, if you like, sir, at this stage is simply because the document that we're holding is with the mortgagee. And as you'd appreciate, there's a process for authority for execution of a document in a particular form. And I'm just trying to, without diluting the substance at all, not present further turns of things for reasons that are not necessary.
Yeah. Ms. Greaves, what's the risk to the council of that wording? Because I was trying to work it through in my head. The unilateral binds the, well, we'll call them the appellant at this point, just to make life easier, binds the appellant to not occupy dwellings until they have your agreement. Now, I suppose there could be an enforcement point if they went ahead and they argued they'd had your agreement because someone said so once upon a time in a meeting somewhere. And it isn't formally put in writing, but I'm not sure I can see the risks to the council of that, because the risk is all on the appellant side of it being contingent that they can prove there was an agreement.
So, as you wish.
Okay.
It is our preference for us to have our agreements drafted requiring submission and approval. I can see the point.
Yes, but I mean, in part, this can't. Okay, the other side of that is that the council could sit on it and never approve it.
That's the risk.
The risk of a unilateral undertaking.
The councils have to act reasonably.
You do have to act reasonably in accordance with your statutory duties. Yeah. Okay. All right. I've got your thoughts on it. I mean, I often see unilaterals which do involve council commitments for the council, and we spend a lot of time trying to weave those out of it. I think this is an attempt by the appellants not to put a duty onto the council in the unilateral undertaking, i.e. that you have to submit something in writing.
But how the agreement is, that position is established, or the council communicates its acceptance of something, taking it to its nth conclusion, nth degree, a unilateral undertaking can't even fix the council with a requirement that it must communicate its approval in writing.
No, it can't. Okay. Some of these matters we'll have to just kind of leave in the wind to a certain extent, because as you're saying, this isn't about a further iteration. This is the document sitting there. There's an argument about whether it works or it doesn't, and I've got to reach a decision. Statutory duty rests on me to decide whether it does what it says on the tin, as it were. Okay, thank you.
Further point on 2.3 is endeavours. So the council would want the situation so we get to say what reasonable endeavours, whether or not the appellant has made reasonable endeavours.
So it might help if because the query was put clearly in terms of where the council is coming from in an email. These are the points we received yesterday and have been responded to. So this point, please remove shall use its reasonable endeavours. There should not be reasonable endeavours obligation. If this is to remain, then it should be amended to allow the council to decide whether the owner has used reasonable endeavours. The alternative is to provide details of what is to amount to reasonable endeavours in the agreement in terms of occupation and management.
Yeah.
The response to that, sir, is that the marketing elements of the approved plan, which is linked to the obligation that we've just discussed, will clearly inform what steps should be required in the performance of reasonable endeavours in the context of marketing. And the council can challenge that performance if it considers that the steps taken fall short of that quality of obligation. Reasonable endeavours is a very well understood term of legal arts in terms of creating, in a particular context, what quality of obligation is required, and the council can prosecute that if it feels like they're falling short of the mark.
Ms. Greaves, the argument is that your agreement of the marketing maintenance management plan would include an understanding, therefore, of what reasonable endeavours are, or the extent of what's considered to be reasonable endeavours. Is that fair?
There is in that document a marketing plan to be approved, and so therefore it will include what that looks like, the steps to be taken,
the period of time over which
appointing
marketing should be made, the extent of the
reputable agents to do that, to fulfil that. That therefore is the route map, if you like, sir, to what reasonable endeavours looks like, and any certainly a failure to comply with any elements of that, or in the manner in which you comply with those things, and if that's felt to be too lax, then a point could be taken about that's not reasonable endeavours. The reality is, though, that there are absolutes in the 6th schedule in relation to the performance triggers associated with the community building, the 50th occupation and the 100th occupation. So this is in relation to the how, but the outcomes are secured by definitive occupation restrictions.
I don't think that's correct. I mean, the concern here, sir, I think goes to ultimately sort of the maintenance and management of the building, and the occupation triggers don't relate to that at all. I mean, I thought it was being suggested that the plan would actually define what reasonable endeavours are, agreed to mean, but I think that's not actually the suggestion. So it's just, again, I'm not suggesting for a moment this is going to happen, but in terms of potential, possible outcomes, if the community building is delivered under this agreement, what actually stops whoever delivers it from saying, we've had a go at it, we've used our reasonable endeavours to maintain it, and now we're off, without the council having to engage in, enforcement action to argue that actually the person has tried nowhere near hard enough to maintain the building?
I think so. The relevance of the reasonable endeavours obligation is about the steps being taken post the approval of the details to actually take forward the proposal. It's not to say that the standard for maintenance is only reasonable endeavours.
Yes, but I can see Mr. Darsh's point. That's not clear from 2.3. I must admit it was my error that I jumped into thinking that reasonable endeavours were around the marketing element. But you're absolutely right. The plan goes further and includes the maintenance.
I'm happy to include management marketing elements, because that is the purpose of that quality of obligation. If we're looking at compliance with the elements that relate to the maintenance and management of it, those are specific standards that would be set out in that plan and approved by the council. So if it helps to overcome that concern, because it's intention, I've no trouble at all in including the reference to the marketing elements of the approved community building marketing maintenance and management plan.
And there'd be nothing, though, to require the maintenance.
Well, apart from the plan.
No, I mean, I think what's being said is that the plan will enable the council to sign off on how the thing is to be marketed, how it is to be maintained, and how it is to be managed, in terms of signing off on this is what we're going to do and say that's okay. But the issue is, where then is there any obligation for actually that to be brought forward on the ground?
Well, let's split it out then, so that reasonable endeavours is in relation to the marketing elements, but then otherwise it's compliance with the terms of the approved community building marketing maintenance and management plan, because that those will be known and fixed standards at that point based on the content of the approved plan.
Yes, I mean, marketing's challenge is that how long do you continue it? Who do you do it with? You can do fake marketing or positive, proactive marketing. We know all of those things can happen. Maintenance should say shall be kept to a certain condition through process. So it should be a much more fixed process.
I think the point, which I don't disagree with, is that it's in, as you say, there are arguments to be had around whether marketing has been extensive.
Sufficient.
I think Mr. Morgan's answer is that, well, we will be able to set the standards to be, the aspirational standard in the plan, and then they will use reasonable endeavours towards it. So I understand that, but it's really around the maintenance and the management of the building. I don't see really why there should be reasonable endeavours.
So we're not.
So we've taken that out.
We would, what we will do in relation to 2.3 is to split out the reasonable endeavours in relation to the marketing elements of the approved plan, and that with regard to the elements that go to maintenance and management, it will be in accordance with the terms of the approved plan.
Does that make sense?
Thank you.
It makes sense to me because that was exactly the jump that I took, was that issue was around securing the marketing. So that, I think, helps for that. Right. Is there more from the council?
Yes.
No. Okay. I raised just a couple of quick ones, and then I've got some questions for the council. Don't run away. The issue of signatories.
Jeanette.
Yes.
Her signature block was supplanted by the more recently confirmed attestation clause for the mortgagee. It simply slipped off. So she'll
go back
signing. She is with the other two individuals, a joint tenant.
And with an interest in the land overall. That was how I'd read the land registry, so that helps. I did raise, I'm sure there's a simple answer to Sellworthy, and I'm sure you can give it to me, but in terms of interest in the land, the owners of Sellworthy are currently owners with an interest in the land within the red line that is covered by this unilateral. I think I flagged that up in my first question, but there could be an easy answer to that.
If I put that in writing, sir, and then it might be easier to set out precisely what that is, so that for your note, it's clearer.
There is an answer then.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
But if I communicate that to you, because I can then take instructions from my client in terms of interests.
Okay.
My understanding is it's owned by the same parties.
Well, that would make life a lot easier.
The same signatories.
Same signatories.
Yes.
Well, that makes life an awful lot easier.
We won't be asking anybody else to sign the document on behalf to bind it.
That could have been the simple answer that I was.
Well, if that's enough, then that's fine.
That's,
just wanted to make sure that you had a full note.
No, that's fine. That was obviously not something that I could have fully understood. So yeah, thank you. Okay. No, I think it's dealt with. I was the 8th schedule when I read it as a bowling club, having been referred to as a bowling green all the way through this. But there is a clubhouse associated with that proposed. I hadn't fully caught onto that, and I was just going to question that was the expectation in light of the language that had been used. But it's affirmed here, so I'm assuming you've looked at that and have affirmed that. Okay, my question that I was going to put to the council comes to two things. And one of them is the one flagged up by Mr. Morgan. The other is just the justification, the still justifications that I had. That table didn't deal with the school's travel plan element. And I just want, because it is a statutory duty on me, confirmation of that. Because I think it just talks about it's necessary to encourage sustainable transport. Yes, so is motherhood and apple pie. The travel plan is directly related, fair and reasonable. Travel plan monitoring costs are provided by HCC. Contribution sum is therefore fairly and reasonably related. It only relates to the monitoring costs, not to the school travel plan. Now, I don't think the appellants are questioning that, and it could be just a very simple link for me to understand where the justification for the school travel plan contribution comes from. And on that basis, I'll be as happy as I was with the previous answer on Sellworthy. But so that was one thing. More substantive thing now appears to be that my original question was, can you direct me to where the formula is that calculates 600 metres of bridleway and 1,556 metres of footpath, equaling £341,000. Now, Now, I'm sure there is a link as set out in the table that having additional residents on the site will introduce additional pressure on the immediately located footpaths. I don't question that, but I just want to know where the formulas exist that take me to it, because it's not just that it's necessary, and I don't think there's a strong argument that it isn't necessary that some support is needed. It's about whether it's reasonable in scale, level, and related to. So there's two things there. I don't know, Mr. Dawes or one of the other team are going to pick those quick questions up for me.
So I think all we can say on the school travel plan, it should have been included in the SIL statement.
Yep.
It is referenced to it.
It's referenced, yeah, but then it only talks about it being reasonable in terms of monitoring costs.
I think it's probably just a by the county council, so we would have to approach the county council to get that justification.
I mean, I'm assuming there is something in the county council's. County council will have done an assessment of increased numbers, like the education team would have done. Increased numbers equals increased requirements on the school. So we need to build more school facilities. There must be something equivalent that says, because there's no secondary school immediately available, there's increased pressure on use of car to get to schools that can be offset, mitigated by a travel plan. I just haven't got the links. I'm saying I assume it's there. I'm hoping people are just going to nod wisely and say, yes, of course, that's exactly what Hampshire have done. Or have they plucked 42,000 out of the air?
No, I'm sure they haven't.
Well, they haven't, but
I think we'd have to get justification by it from the county council because they're not here today. So.
Do you have anything, Mr. Morgan, on it?
Nothing beyond the figure, the purpose, and the facilities.
The facility?
The education facilities, the Bramley Primary School and Everest Secondary School, which are the recipients potentially of this money for the travel plan.
Right, because I was assuming there was capacity at them, because I've got nothing in terms of education provision, or that's picked up in the general SIL schedules. But okay, I mean, I didn't even have that in terms of where it was aimed to be delivered. So to get the directly related element, I was a little.
I assume you have all the responses to the.
I may well do, Mr. Ross, but
I know. So there is a response from the County Council. I've got it dated 31st of March 2022, where that school travel plan, and it says it goes through all of it, and then it says encouraging positive travel behaviours, vital message, etc. Schools and etc. The academy, wider travel plan for development sites achieving targets, and where the development results in an increase in number of pupils at local schools, existing school travel plan should be updated to further encourage non-car modes of travel. So what we are doing, what this is not creating a new school travel plan. It's an update to the current ones that exist to reflect the additional pupils that will be travelling to that school. That's one thing. And then the second £42,000 is measures to promote non-car accessibility to those local schools.
What we don't know, so is how you get to, well, how the outcome is linked to £42,000 in terms of what additional resource work, consultancy, or the original travel plan would be required to deal with the additional.
Yes. Okay. I think it's fair that I could have flagged it earlier, but to be honest, I read that first draft and then thought, I looked at the second draft and I thought it hasn't changed much. But then I did a much more detailed review yesterday, and some of these points have come out of that. I think, as has happened with everybody in terms of there being emails bouncing around yesterday, which hasn't given the council or county council perhaps time to dot the I's, cross the T's on matters that remain outstanding for me. So the challenge, Ms. Greaves, is to get a highway authority position. I don't like things to extend beyond the ends of the inquiry in terms of answers to questions. But if there is a simple answer that can be attained and that could be fed back to me tomorrow while we're in the room, that would be great. If I have to revisit that and give them time, because I'd like the appellants to have had a chance to look at it, because I think the question remains the same as mine to an extent. Where does the 42,000 come from? If it's a matter of saying these are the two schools, this is the cost that will be involved in us updating the travel plan, and these are the measures that the travel plan identify that will be necessary as mitigation for 140 times the calculation for number of children to attend those schools, that's fine.
I am trying to help as much as I can. The transport statement of common ground.
Oh, right.
Which we haven't been to at all. So I love going to documents. That this is obviously a statement of common ground between the appellant and Hampshire County Council. Call document reference. If somebody could assist me. 6.4. You will find in paragraph 2.2 of that 2.2e, a reference to request and contribution £42,000 towards school travel plan, and underneath that you'll see iTransport produced a transport assessment addendum that provided this information and sought clarification justification. And then the framework travel plan was also amended to take on board the HCC comments. So I think the position is there clearly was discussion between the parties and sought that clarification justification. And clearly that had been provided, because otherwise the statement of common ground will not be provided to us. So that may, sir, it appears that iTransport asked exactly the same question that you did.
Yeah.
Clearly that information was provided to them, and on that basis, this has been signed as is before you, sir. In terms, so you see, if you go to 2.5, HCC response also provided additional details of the purpose of school travel plan contribution, and then it continues to go along in terms of, where we got to, and then fine, you get to 2.8 with HCC has got no objections. So it clearly has gone through a process. And then you've got towards travel plans at Bramley Primary School and Everett Community.
Okay, so there's agreement from the appellants, which is a positive thing. And there must be some evidence somewhere.
There was clearly, it was requested.
How do iTransport to sign that off?
It was requested, clearly was provided, because otherwise there wouldn't be that agreement. So, I mean, clearly, you can be provided a paper, and I've got no issue with that. But I think
I can be a bit more confident that it's there is just
a question that our transport consultants asked of Hampshire County Council, and clearly that was provided to them, and on that basis they agreed and signed. Both parties signed this statement of common ground that is before this inquiry.
So there's also an HCC, so a Highway Authority response on the file dated the 21st of July last year.
Okay.
Which says there's a section headed travel plan that's talking about, first of all, the action plan, which is Appendix C to the iTransport application documents. That's not relevant to the school point. But then there's a paragraph that says, with regard to the request for further information in relation to the school travel plan contribution, the development will yield in the region of an additional 42 primary and 29 secondary pupils.
Yep.
This is a development of a substantial size, and there will be a potential significant impact on additional car journeys to and from the primary and secondary schools serving the area of the new housing. it's important that active travel to school is promoted to provide opportunities for walking, cycling and scooting. Didn't know that was a verb. And this can be achieved by undertaking school travel plans, which engage with key stakeholders to promote active travel. And then there's a section that says why the contribution is needed and why the authority thinks it meets the SIL tests.
Okay.
At the end, it says it's fair and reasonable as it reflects the costs associated with producing school travel plans, the associated monitoring fees, and an allocation for additional physical measures, such as cycle and scooter storage, to affect the number of additional journeys to and from school. The modest contribution amount will be used to provide the necessary new school travel plans, etc., etc. Without the contribution, the necessary school travel planning work could not be undertaken. So it's fair that that letter itself doesn't have a table saying, you know, the scooter thing is
how it adds up.
£1,000, and it may be that we can obtain the details from the council, but in narrative terms, at least they seem to have turned their mind to it.
I think that's helpful. It's just information that didn't get translated over to the table thing through for me. So I think that position from both parties is helpful, and I've got the references to those documents. I'll go back and look at them. Let's not overcook this one in light of the position that we've got. We might need to do it with the next one, but let's not overcook this one. Don't worry about highways. I'll use those references, Ms. Sargent. Thank you very much for the 21st of July one. And I'll link those three together. That's fine. Public footpaths. Yes, my first thought was it's a very exact figure, as were the length of meterage of footpaths we provided, and I'm sure there's something that will assist me.
Yes, we had a response from the countryside service at the county council, which included the written justification in terms of seeking contribution, and attached to that a contribution sum costing schedule, which sets out in high level of detail lengths of footpath, etc.
Yep.
At the bottom, it provides costing of 100. It's really tiny, so I think it's how much per metre of the bridleway, the 600 metres you refer to, and 1.5 surface works. This was shared with the appellant on the 6th of December. So if you'd like a copy of
Is it? It's not in evidence.
No.
As such. I think I probably do need a copy of that one so that I understand. I think the connection that's necessary is how you translate 140 houses into what might be that desire to improve the footpaths. I can fully accept that might cost what's needed to improve the footpaths. The question is, can we link additional pressure from this scheme to that?
The county do say, they say it's an introduction of 140 units, which will equate to an additional 350 persons. Many of these who will want to use the pass. And it's basically their argument is that the existing pass services will result in an additional increase in level of use.
Yes.
Wear and tear.
Yes.
And make specific reference to the Brenda Pathway and the surrounding rights of way network, and how it's necessary to secure financial contributions to ensure the future maintenance of those highway assets so that they're accessible into the future. And it then makes reference to the formula developed by the Countryside Service to result in that amount that has been requested as per the calculation.
Okay. Let me have a copy of that.
And then referencing the framework in terms of promoting healthy lifestyles.
Okay. Let me have a copy of that. Mr. Morgan, you've had that. The teams have had that.
Yeah, we've seen in terms of the narrative of that request. I mean, as you say, sir, there's obviously a difference between just defining in your mind how much capital work you think is going to be necessary as a result of the impact on the network by the residents of the scheme, but then simply translating what you think that is, going through the HCC calculation for capital improvement works as well as a maintenance sum, and the sum of 341,000 breaks down 128,628 of it is for the capital works, but 212,940 is the commuted maintenance sum. So the maintenance amount significantly outstrips the improvements that the authority has told itself would be necessary as the result of the impact of this scheme. So there's obviously the principle, and then there's the issue of proportionality.
Yes. Okay, I don't think I've got much else I can take apart from having that document and reading it through. So let me have that one in. That will be another inquiry document, which will be 19. I don't know how easy that is to get copies for me. Obviously, it's not needed for the council, but if you can get a hard copy for me, that would be very helpful. Okay, are there any other matters on the unilateral? I'll just check with the council whether there's anything that they wanted to pick up on. Yes, was there a point you wanted to pick up on?
Yes, if I may, sir.
Of course.
Obviously, the situation we're in at Peel, the local ward councillors have not been consulted on the 106 agreements, as would normally be the case.
Yeah.
Having reviewed some of the detail, I may just offer you some points for consideration. When it came to allotments, you made a statement essentially go to the parish council or management company or the running of the allotment.
Or other organisations.
Other party, yes.
As I went through the allotment agreement, it refers to the allotment specification. When you go to Annex 4 of the allotment specification, it's not particularly well constructed, other than I think what would help was the word Basingstoke Borough Council allotment specification. I'm not got the reference number for that. The reason I say that is I've been involved in a number of allotment schemes, and the most recent one was very vague, and we're having to pay for more fencing and security gates, which were not done to the standard as to what the developer thought he understood he was doing. So I think it's very vague, and it needs a bit of fleshing out to protect whoever manages the security, etc. That one.
So if I could just come back on a level of detail, we obviously have the minimum space requirements, and in broad terms, the composition of the allotments by definition in the allotment schedule. Minimum size requirements, number of rods. That's the terminology for.
Yep.
The reality is that in the green infrastructure policy document, that actually it's a 2018 updated version of something that was 2013 to 2029. As long as it is about talking about the different typologies of green space, when you actually look at the part of that document that deals with what, if you were looking for a specification for allotments in terms, it actually doesn't go any further than the two bullets that have been faithfully transposed from that document to Annex 4. So that's as much as we have been led to believe is required to define a specification based upon the local planning authority's own document. As brief as it is, however, there is the requirement that the detail of the allotments is again a matter for approval by the council, and there is an enforceable mechanism for that. So if more detail than that is required to secure an approval, then there is a process for that.
Yeah, within the schedule itself, it requires that the allotment specification, the exact location, boundaries, design, layout and maintenance accords with a specification for the approval in writing of the planning and development manager.
With respect, sir, what I'm saying is we've seen this before, but we end up with 1 metre high fencing, not 2 metre high fencing. We don't get locks on gates, and we don't get the necessary water troughs and the plumbing arrangements, because it's specifically laid out in what the borough has as standard. Obviously, I'm now saying this fresh, we have not been involved, so it's, well, that would be the request, that we don't have a situation which, should a parish council wish to take it on, we'd end up in all sorts of legalities about it. It's not fit for purpose. That's the point.
Well, there is, this mechanism is not to the exclusion of a specification, which because it obviously makes sense if the developer is looking to a party which, to transfer the allotments to a party which is not its own estate management company, then there would have to be a dialogue between the developer and, say, the parish council or the other party that the local planning authority has approved as a recipient. And because the transfer of land, and this goes beyond just what the specification is, but the reality is it would have to be a two-way street in order for the transfer of land by deed to include all the detail that was necessary, the rights, the restrictive covenants and all those things, as well as being a successor in title in respect of the ongoing maintenance of this in accordance with its specification. This does not preclude any of that. But the reality is that at the moment, the only standards are those that are set out here. And we have, in defining the allotment specification, made reference to what that currently looks like. But it
does accept that it can change.
Exactly. So just for the benefit of those in attendance, the allotment specification published by the council as may from time to time be amended. The current specification is set out in Annex 4. So what it is may change by reference and therefore compliance with this document in terms of what it is that the council can require for its approval. But then the practical side of this is that if it is not the estate management company which is going to be the recipient of it, it will only happen if the allotments are delivered to an acceptable standard to another party.
So there's 2 points of control. I mean, one, maybe that the council needs to look at how it specifies allotments. Basingstoke and Dean. Sorry. But that's outside of the interest of this inquiry. And what I'm being told is that currently it specifies an allotment as being those two clips in Annex 4. So maybe there's work to do internally, and I'm not going to go there. But if a different specification is there, then the obligation commits them to meet that revised specification. The second is that if it is going to go out to the management company and it's going to go, for example, to the parish council, there is a dialogue that must need to take place before it's transferred to make sure it's of a condition suitable for transfer. I know that can often come down to quite a lot of pressure on parties to just get it moved on and all sorts of other aspects that may alter those debates. But I appreciate the point made.
Another one, just I think talking about the highways, footpaths.
Yes.
System. Is it a consideration, a possibility that the money be ring-fenced for the works specified in the immediate area for use of site? In other words, it doesn't disappear the other side of Hampshire. I know that
must be delivered, or else it's not.
That's absolutely fine. So that's robustly contained in the.
I mean, the purpose. The money is payable to the authority, and the purposes which they say establish the quantum.
Yes.
Relate specifically to the scheme of works that they've identified. Yeah. So in that sense, yes, there is the relationship between the amount and the purpose, but ultimately, because it's a unilateral undertaking, we were limited with respect to seeking obligations which could be enforced by the developer. To introduce rigour and transparency around value for money spend and their ultimate delivery. We're not able to do that with this style of 106, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yes. I mean, it's a simple point. I have to be assured that it is relevant to the development, i.e., that it is meeting and addressing harms that could be associated with the development. So it should be spent locally. Unfortunately, once the money is transferred, it's not in the gift of the developer where it's spent, it's in the gift of the receiving party, which would be in most cases, the Highways Authority in this
But
case.
I think, I mean.
And they have a
if-
duty
if
and
the funds were
reasonableness.
misapplied, then there would be a public law.
There is absolutely an issue of duty and responsibility set out for delivery.
And the very last point, I put this in, if we'd have had a consultation, if we'd have been able to, we would have said, and I did do that in my evidence that I did on Tuesday. We have enough community buildings. We do not need any more community buildings. And if there was any possible way, for instance, that the monies could be deferred into an offsite payment contribution, say to the parish council for community buildings, that would be far more preferable. That's a bit of a.
Let's come back on that point. I think it was communicated via Mr. Beeves that there was a change of tack on one other item, but just on community building. On the 4th of this month, there was a different style entirely of obligation sought by the local planning authority for the community building. That is not what is tabled for your consideration in this document, because obviously the appellant's prerogative, the UU, is to order it in place. We've been consistent throughout in terms of that style of obligation on site. It's consistent with the fact that the community building forms part of the description of development in this case. There is an absolute, in terms of the enforceability of the triggers for what it is and when it is to be delivered, that is unqualified in terms of its delivery. But the point of distinction between this community building and other community buildings, halls that may be already in existence, is that there are potential uses of this space because of the new Class E. It's not new anymore, but Class E, but very broad, in relation to potential for retail and other more flexible private uses that could have different terms in terms of their longevity, but there could well be, relative to this scheme, an anchor retail unit, for example, for food produce and other things, which is materially different from, I think, the types of facilities that the local authority might seek a commuted sum for. So it's not that only we're proposing on site and committed to it. The benefits to be delivered by this particular facility might be different from those others.
It has raised its head in evidence at times over the inquiry. I absolutely understand your point in that I've driven around Bramley a couple of times now. It's quite clear that there's a number of community facilities that are available and used in the village. And the neighbourhood plan is what led to its inclusion. But I get the feeling that what it will deliver is not traditional village hall type use. And the ambition probably of the council as well as the appellant is that it delivers beneficial use for Bramley. And I think the flexibility is there in the way it's been proposed to be taken forward to allow for it to be perhaps a second community shop, one at the other end of the village as opposed to at the other side of the level crossing.
The definition of community.
Yes, I just think shall I say this? It's been lumbered with that terminology because that was what the application said it was delivering. It may not be traditional in the form that people most readily understand a community building as being a village hall where the scouts might meet and the parish council might meet, because you've got some of those. It is a point, and it has raised its head in evidence as we've been talking. Are we happy with where we're at on the unilateral? I've tested a couple of points. I'm expecting something, just the document that's in relation to the school travel plan. The only issue probably is that there are a couple of changes.
Yes.
Small, minor.
Small change. So what I
appreciate
to do is before, essentially, I'll immediately before the session, because of the light touch way in which we can amend that.
Yeah.
Paragraph 2.3 for the community building 6 schedule.
Yes.
To address the marketing and absolute compliance with maintenance, management, operation of that facility. What I'll do is I'll pen out a form of words which I'll invite these groups to take instructions on in short order, and hopefully we can just give you both confirmation that we're happy with that alternative form.
Good. It'll obviously add a little bit to the time because that's going to have to again go out to the mortgagees for signatures and stuff like that. You know, I can wear a bit of a delay in terms of getting it to me.
10 working days is what I've been asked for. Is that within your scale of tolerance?
It is.
Thank you. That's kind. Thank you, sir.
Tell me what that date is. Tomorrow, 27th. It's going to be the X of February, isn't it? Friday the
3rd, I think. Is that right? Friday the 3rd?
There we go. Oh, perfect. That's nice and quick. Thank you very much indeed. So that was document 19 for me. Good. Any other matters that we can deal with before I release everyone? We meet at, for those who are joining me, at 1:30 on the site.
So could I just ask what inquiry document 18 is?
Oh,
It's your use class.
it was the use class order.
Okay, I didn't know that, whether that had actually gone in or not in the end, but it's fine.
Good. Thank you for your contributions this morning. As always, the matter of conditions, unilateral undertaking is something the inspectors view without prejudice, but they have statutory duty, particularly in relation to the unilateral. And conditions that I will look at in terms of the discussions we've had today as to whether they meet the necessary tests, the required tests, to make the development acceptable, but only obviously in a circumstance where my full appraisal of the evidence suggests that it's a scheme that should be allowed. Very good. Thank you all very much.
I just ask tomorrow morning.
Yes.
I appreciate you have, I think, a commitment later on in the day. I'm not proposing to barter with you at all. I would just ask whether, and I appreciate the answer, no, would a 10 a.m. start be?
Would be fine. It would be fine. And I think that might help everyone just in terms of getting ducks aligned in the morning.
Yes.
Very happy with a 10 o'clock start. We're talking about an hour and a half on closings, are we?
I would have thought that sort of order. I mean, I've 45 minutes each, my kind of finger in the wind.
I was being generous. I was giving you an hour. An hour each.
Sorry, an hour each.
But just have it.
An hour, sir.
Fantastic. I don't have any problem with 10s then.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking sort of 35 pages max. Well, I've suggested 35 pages max to the person who's beavering away doing the first draft right now. So yeah, 45 minutes on each side. Like, I'm assuming, so you would like an electronic version as well, or not, or hard copy is fine?
Hard copy is fine for me.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we need to provide the electronic because the council will put it on the website.
Yes, that's a good point. Yes. Yeah.
Closings is
So there will be a public electronic version should there be need.
There will have to go onto the website.
Yes. Yeah. So should you later on, if you want to direct,
you don't need to
online.
Yeah.
Download.
Don't need to bust a gut to get it.
Thank you.
Tomorrow. 10 o'clock's absolutely fine. So thanks very much for that. Thank you all for your time this morning. I'll see whoever I'm